And when you have your first your transactions, when you do your transactions through the productivity program, we will be the ones that will be working with you, making sure everyone's kept, understands what's going on, and making sure you keep on task and we get everything we need. So I just want to put a face to a name, and then if you guys want to go around, just so maybe that way I can put a face to your name too, that'd be great.
Hi, I'm Taylor Mallard McClellan. Just our name.
And are you new? Are you all?
I'm new.
Okay.
Just signed on. I just moved back to Georgia from Mississippi
Oh,
for
cool.
12 years. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Cool. Love Georgia.
Hi, I'm Kama.
Hi, Kim.
I transferred from the Tucker location like maybe 15 days ago.
Oh, okay. What location?
Tucker.
Oh, okay. So KW.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, got it.
My name is Jaden Nardella, and I am new to KW about 7 or 8 months now.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
My name is Brittany Fields.
And I've been with the brokerage for 6 months.
Oh, okay, great.
I am Jennifer as well. I am new to KW, new to this part of real estate.
Okay.
I work in development, so
Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah, literally just a few days.
Awesome. Yeah, it's I've been doing it since 2004, and I'm still learning. So just know that every day is a day you're going to learn something new. Every transaction, there's going to be something new that you're going to learn, and don't ever feel like, oh my God, I should have known that. There's no way to know everything. There's really not. I'm sorry, we just introduced ourselves.
Oh, hi. I'm Laurie.
Hi, Lori.
I'm at Peachtree Road and just
Oh.
checking out some classes here and dropping in
Awesome.
to explore the Market Center.
Awesome. And then I'm Cherie, and then Jennifer works with me. We do the contract to close for the productivity program here. So let me know when you guys are ready. Are we still working it?
We're still,
And you plugged in, right?
yep. But yes, Cherie's amazing. Okay,
You're so sweet.
could we like finally, because we were just talking about you. Do you want to go by Cherie or Cherie? Because
Okay, my mom named me Cherie. My whole life everyone calls me Cherie. But I do have a few pockets of people that call me Cherie, and it's fine. So I'll answer to both. Most people call me Cherie.
Because Christy Parker called me one day and she's like, Case. And I'm like, yes, Christy. She's like, you are pronouncing Cherie's name wrong. And I'm
She
like,
calls me that. Yeah, she'll call me Cherie.
I was like, who's Cherie? And then I was like, oh.
No. Both are right. It's whatever you want. I'll answer to both. I mean, my own family can't even spell a name right, so it's okay. It's fine.
But seriously, she's really, really amazing. And, in the back end of coaching, when you're submitting contracts and stuff like that, I am your point of contact for those things. Unless you have a, productivity partner, which would be like an agent in the market center you're specifically working with, and you would know that before you even join PC coaching. But Cherie's the one in the background who is also looking at contracts with me, just so we have more than like one set of eyes on all of it at all times. And did you mention like you used to be the compliance broker?
I didn't mention that yet. So I've been in real estate since 2004. I've had my broker's license since 2007. I've actually been the managing broker of 3 different brokerages and a compliance broker of 3 different brokerages. And KW in town, I was the broker and a compliance person. So I totally know what KW wants.
Progress.
So it's, and I'm probably a little pickier than what they're being right now, so just you guys. But when I review your contracts, I use it as a teaching moment as well. I'm going to explain if there's something you should have done differently, or if there's something I feel like we need to fix with an amendment. I will definitely mention that to you, because I want you to be protected as well. I want to protect the brokerage, I want to protect you. It's also for the next time, maybe it's not a big deal this time, but next time, making sure you understand what needs to happen. I have to read backwards. Can I flip around?
It's not, it looks backwards to us, but on Zoom it's not.
Okay. Well, it's a good thing I'm a book. I can't read backwards. I'm like,
You can do a lot of things that you can read back.
yeah, I can't read backwards. But as far as the contracts, I mean, it's a big deal. I mean, it's a big deal to your clients, should be a big deal to you. I wanna make sure you guys are getting it right, and again, it's all about protection. And it has so many, it's come a long way. The contract used to be a lot different, and it had, the important data was on multiple pages, and thank God they put it all on the first page right now. There is no reason not to have everything right. It has, you just fill in the blanks. But you do need to be able to understand and explain to your clients, you know, what each of the blanks mean.
Okay.
And this class is usually a 3-hour class. We're going to make it 2 hours. Definitely ask questions. Case is gonna be monitoring the people on Zoom and letting me know if there's any questions on Zoom. Because it will be hard. My eyesight is not that good to be able to see questions up there.
No, you're good. Don't worry about it. You just do your thing, and we will
Okay.
proctor and monitor.
Are you ready for me to start yet?
Are you meeting on anyone else?
I don't know.
No, I'm good if you're good and set up.
All good,
Okay.
sorry.
No, you're good. We weren't expecting to have this room,
Oh,
so that's why
it's a good room.
it is a great room, and I'm glad that we did get it. But
Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah.
I don't know if I think you all have yours up on, I don't know if you can probably see the screen behind me. Let's scroll into the GAR Table of Contents and Forms Index. It's a good thing to scroll through here. It's the GAR Forms Table of Contents. There's almost a form for everything you could possibly want. So try to make yourself familiar. If you look at the table of contents, it's broken out to the consumer brochures. It tells you what the form number is. It tells you what the brochure is. It talks about the brokerage agreements. So definitely get familiar with what forms are out there. And I mean, a lot of these you're not going to use, but it's good to know what is out there and what your options are. And then if you look at, so there's the table of contents, and then there's the form index. The form index is alphabetical. I do like how they made the table of contents where they have, you know, the consumer brochures, the brokerage agreements, the purchase and sale agreements. So it's good to, you know, skim through there and see what, you know, and they have different amendments. So it's good to understand what's out there. And then, like I said, the index has everything in alphabetic order for that. So that's just more for your information. So let's go to special stipulations. Let's go to that. Let's keep going. Scroll. There we go. So there also is, you know, on your contract, when you're writing a contract, there's special stipulations box on, you know, page 7. Look in here if you need a special stip first, because most likely it's been written for you instead of trying to write it yourself, because that's where agents get in trouble. They don't put the right amount of information in a stipulation, and it's not clear. And when it's not clear, that's when there's a chance for the other party to be not on the same page as you, and that's not the goal. The goal is that everyone's on the same page and you understand what, you know, the other party wants. Go to page 3 of the special steps.
Did I go too far?
No, keep going. It should say at the bottom, page 3. So on page 3 of the special stipulations, I just wanted to point out a couple. The SS 302, where it says amendment to address concerns as notice to terminate. When you do your amendment to address concerns, this is when you have a due diligence period. If, you know how they usually end at midnight, unless you put another special stipulation saying it's gonna end at a different time. This is a good stipulation to use if you mean it. So this stipulation basically says that if they do not accept your amendment to address concerns, that this is going to serve as notice that you're going to terminate. So you don't have to wait up until midnight to see if they're gonna accept it. You're already giving them a notice. But if you don't mean that, I wouldn't use this step. It's only when you have a client that is like, I am not buying this house unless they do all these 15 items on here. And I would explain to them, okay, we can put the stipulation in there, but understand that we're telling them we're gonna terminate. Now, if they have a backup offer, they're gonna roll to that backup offer, and you're done. Now, there is a way to walk back from this. If there's no one else waiting in the wings, you can reinstate a contract. That is a newer form, but you can reinstate a contract if you send a termination over. And all parties have to agree to reinstate it, but it can be done. But again, only use this if they are like, I don't care, I'm not buying it if they don't do these items. SS 306, flood zones. If you have a property that you see that it's, you know, the backyard seems really low and it's possible and there's water behind there, like a creek or something, it might be in a flood zone. There might be, and when you are in a flood zone, the insurance is separate and it's really expensive. It's not cheap. My whole career, I've only sold one property in a flood zone. They're not my favorite properties. I try not to have my clients buy a property in a flood zone. But they knew what they were getting into. It was the only house that they liked it, they could afford, so they ended up buying it. One of the things that I learned through that experience was the sellers were like, oh, the flood insurance is, I want to say it was like $500 and some a year. They're like, oh, that's not bad. My clients went to get a quote. It was $2,000. Even when they went back to the same people that were insuring the sellers, they said, nope, they got grandfathered in, it is going to be around that price. So don't assume if you are selling your property in a flood zone, have your people during your due diligence period call, how much is flood insurance going to be? And if you know it's gonna be in a flood zone, what we ended up negotiating was that they would pay a couple years of the flood insurance, credit the buyers at closing for a couple years of flood insurance. So that would be something I would want to negotiate in. But your clients definitely need to know. I mean, flood zone properties in a normal market, they're not attractive. People don't want them because they know it's extra money, and also people don't want to live with a flood zone because you can't, it impacts what you can build, if you want to expand a house, it impacts what you're going to be able to do with that property. So just know that it's, even if they say it's cheap, it may not be cheap. So that's something that I would want to make sure you took care of during your due diligence. So we're not going to go through all these special steps, but Case, go to page 10 of the special steps. So sometimes you get a property that they're like, oh, it's investor owned, sold as is, we're not going to give you a disclosure. SS 704, it talks about the appliances and the systems being in good working order. And you're saying that the seller warrants that all appliances remaining of the property and all portions of the HVAC, plumbing, irrigation, if any, and electrical will be good working order and repair as of the day of closing. Because you really have no protection. When you don't have a seller's disclosure, you have basically zero protection. And we're going to talk later more about the seller's disclosure, some other things that you should be doing if you don't get one. But I just wanted to point that one out. And again, I know it's going to be not easy reading, but I would skim through all the steps in here, just so you familiarize yourself with what is out there.
Are you saying that you submit that if it's like an as-is?
I would put in there about.
So it's just an additional.
And there's also another special stip, which we're going to talk about in a second. I put some personal special stipulations in here that if there's no seller's disclosure provided, what the seller's responsibility is. And I know in this market, it's really hard because your gut's going to be, I need to make it clean. I need to not put any special stipulations in there. And you may have to not put special stipulations in there in order to get the contract, but it's better to put in there to try to protect your client. Or explain to your client.
We receive no disclosures at all.
Yeah, yeah. Because there's a lot of times, especially investor owned, they're like, we've never lived there, or we don't know anything about the house. I'm like, okay. go to personal special steps. There you go. Okay, so these are special stipulations that when I was broker here, we started typing up, you know, to help. And I don't know who uses dot loop in here. Is anyone?
I have before.
Okay. There is a way that you can add a clause when you are in the special stip box on the purchase and sale, that if you go up to add a clause, these will be in there and you can just check and it'll drop it in so you don't have to retype it. So there's a way for that. The first stip we had Seth Wiseman write for us because we were running into a lot of not getting lead-based paint in time, and lead-based paint is a federal law. You have to have the lead-based paint disclosure. Your client has to sign it after the seller signs it. The seller has to sign first before they go under contract. So Seth was like, fine, I'll write you a stip. So this is a stipulation that if you don't get a lead-based paint, you should include it in there in the contract about getting lead-based paint prior to binding. I don't know why he puts 12 hours have elapsed, but I'm sure some legal reason. Most people don't wait. Like, say you get the contract back and they give you the special the lead-based paint. Go ahead and have your client sign it. As long as they sign it before or on the day of binding, you're fine. As long as you get that document, and we're going to go through that document too. That is a document that if this office got audited and they picked your contract and it wasn't done completely or wasn't done right, it's tens of thousands of dollars of fine for you and the office. So it is definitely a form that you want to make sure you get right every time. Because if you do it wrong, there's really no walking back from it. And then the second stipulation under special steps is the one about the seller's disclosure not being provided. And it basically says that it's not being provided, that the buyer, it's also like buyer beware too. The buyer needs to, has the right and responsibility to thoroughly inspect, and that the seller understands about that not providing the written disclosure does not relieve them of their legal obligation. So it's sort of like a reminder to seller, hey, this does not relieve you, and buyer beware, you need to make sure you inspect. And there's a lot of these are some that are used a lot. Like the third one down there, no HOA docs attached to the offer. HOAs are very important. Not all HOAs are healthy. And if you do not have a copy of the condo rules and regulations, like say, for example, your client has a 100-pound dog. Well, they may have a 50-pound dog limit. And you don't want your client to move in there with a 100-pound dog and then be told they had to get rid of their dog. So there's things that it's not your responsibility, but it is your responsibility to make sure that your client gets the information and that they are reviewing it. Because they're the ones that are going to live there. They're the ones that have to live with the rules. So basically this stipulation talks about getting the covenants, the HOA budget. That's key to look at too. I'll skim through it, but in the end, your client needs to be reviewing this as well. Because say there's a lot of owners that have not paid their HOA dues and it's dragging the HOA down. Well, guess what will happen eventually? There's going to be an assessment because they don't have enough funds. So you want to make sure that they're healthy, that they have a good bottom line.
And really quick,
Yeah.
if you guys, because of the way that the market is right now and having to remove a lot of stipulations, just make sure that you keep this and write out everything that is in the stipulation that she's asking for.
Yeah.
So this way you could ask the listing agent for it, or you could help assist your buyer with getting it from the HOA during your due diligence.
Absolutely. That's the key. Get it during due diligence.
Yep.
Make sure it's reviewed during due diligence. And, you know, in a normal market, you would put the next stipulation in there if there's any assessments due that the seller is going to pay them. Because it depends on the assessment. If it's not due until after closing, what's ever due after closing, that's the buyer's responsibility. So if you want the seller to pay the full special assessment, you would want to put this stipulation in there. And again, we're not in a normal market, but in normal markets, you'll be able to use a lot of these. The next one basically about parking spaces and if there's any are they deeded or not, and what are the parking spaces numbers? I mean, that's important, you need to know. And then same on the next page for storage unit, is there a storage unit? Sometimes they do have a storage unit, that's a huge asset, and you want it conveyed with your property. If there's a tenant, and you don't want them to be there after closing, then you're gonna wanna have the stipulation that, they're gonna terminate all leases and the tenants are gonna be gone. Inheriting a tenant is risky. You'll definitely, in the next stipulation talks about, you're gonna want a lot of stuff if the tenant is staying. You're gonna want the lease, you're gonna wanna know how much their security deposits are, because you're gonna want that credit at closing. You're gonna wanna know how much they're paying on their lease, because you're gonna want a prorated credit for that at closing. Who's taking care of the water? Because if it's the seller taking care of the water and you close, you want to put in your contract that they're to leave the water on for a certain amount of days, or else your tenants are going to be really mad when you close and there's no water. In the city of Atlanta, it takes a minute to be able to get your water turned on. So there's definitely a little more complication when there is a tenant, in that they're going to remain. If you're doing a backup agreement, meaning you did not become primary, but they're going to allow you to be a backup contract. And we'll get into this more on a second class I'm going to teach. We're going to go into more of these other exhibits. The backup agreement, earnest money, the way the backup agreement is stated is earnest money is due the moment. And a backup agreement is a contract. That just means if the first one falls through, they have to come to you if they allow you to be the backup. You're number two. And that's good, because that doesn't mean they're going to go back on the market and you have to fight again for it. No, you will become primary if the first one backs out. But an important note is earnest money, the way the backup agreement's written, earnest money is due the moment they accept you as a backup, and you would want to put a stipulation in there saying, no, I want earnest money to be due when I become primary. Because why would you want to collect earnest money now? You may not become primary. And then it's just a pain to get it back and everything. So definitely that stipulation is important for that. Home warranty, I've seen this written 8,000 ways to Sunday, but this is the easiest way to write it. Talks about who's providing it, it's a 1-year warranty, what's their cost not to exceed, and that you will be ordering it. The person representing the buyer is the one that orders it. And then this talks about the termination again. If the Atac is not, that's the one we just talked about, that was in the other special steps. If they don't accept your amendment to address concerns, that can serve as termination. The seller's property disclosure statement, it just talks, the next special step is if it's not attached at the time of offer, that you're gonna wanna get it. Again, all these you're gonna wanna get within your due diligence period. Give them 24, 48 hours, depending on how long your due diligence period is, because you're gonna wanna have time to review them, because there may be something that popped up in the seller's disclosure that you're like, oh, wait a minute, the roof is how old? And you're gonna wanna have time to negotiate something else possibly.
And another thing on top of that, which I know you're gonna cover, is make sure if you do not get a seller's disclosure statement when you're making an offer, that you write in what appliances were physically at the property when you viewed it, and look at MLS and see what's on there, because if you do not write it in, and let's say you get the seller's disclosure later, and they're not including anything, then if you don't have stipulations saying what's there, they can take all the appliances if they want to.
Oh yeah, they can take all the light fixtures. Yes, we will be talking about that. And then the next one, about utilities, because there's times that it's an investor property and maybe they don't have the gas on. So when you're doing you're going to be putting an offer on a house, and it's a gas stove, turn the gas stove on. Make sure turn the water on, make sure all the utilities are on. If they're not, you're going to want to, put a stip in that you're not going to start your due diligence period until those are on, until you receive notice. Because why waste your time? Because you're going to have to pay the inspector to come back out if the gas isn't on by chance. Because it could be 3 appliances or whatever that are on gas that you wouldn't have thought of. And then the next one about Atac repairs subject to reinspection. This would be something you would write in your amendment to address concerns. It would be your paragraph above saying that Basically, they have so many days to remedy the concerns if after you reinspect, they're still not done. If you go in with 15 items, there's a good chance that 3 or 4 of them are not gonna be done right. And if you're going in with a lot of items, I would highly recommend that you tell your client, look, we need to get the inspector back out here. I won't be able to tell you if they did that right, the inspector will. And there's usually a small reinspect fee. So that would be something like maybe when you're doing your inspection, just say, hey, if we need to bring you back out, how much is it? So your client knows. Escalation clause, the one on page 3 at the bottom, this is the most common one used because it's not net of seller concessions. Does everyone understand what the escalation clause does? You all good? Okay.
In general.
Okay, so basically in this market, everyone is using escalation clauses and they're also using appraisal gaps. Escalation clause is basically like, we're not giving you our best offer yet, but we will escalate, and I would pick a weird number. I would do like $21.50 above the next highest offer up to, and put a cap on it. And the only reason I would use a weird number, and honestly I would use a weird number on my offer price too, because you want to stand out. You want to try to beat out the other offers. And doing contract to close, I see lots of contracts, and the ones that have the weirdo numbers and the weirdo escalation clause number, they're the ones that are winning. But it's basically putting, we'll come up. Well, fine. If you have an offer that's better than ours, we'll come up. We'll come up to this amount. But the other, they have to give you the other offer to show that you really did beat out someone real. So they do have to give you that. So that's the not net of seller. No one's really using the net of seller. No one probably really understands what that means, so that's why they're not using it. But basically, and in this market, people aren't asking for anything, but say that they were asking for closing costs and a home warranty and maybe a termite bond. You would subtract out all those from the original offer, and that would be the net, because they're not really netting what you're offering if they have to pay all these other items, the seller. So, like I said, most people aren't using that, but it's there. Repair and retreat bond, this talks about if there's a termite bond. If you see on a seller's disclosure that they have a bond, I would certainly be asking for that to be transferred, because a termite bond is a good thing for your client to have. And it's usually pretty cheap, $300 a year, depending on the house. But it's definitely a good thing to keep going with what you have versus they have to start over. If they have to start over with a new bond, the companies charge between $1,500 and $3,000 because they have to put in the new systems and everything. And they can't come in and use the old systems from another company because they're not allowed. It's against the law. They literally have to come in. They have to take if you hire a different company, they have to take the bait stations out and they have to put them on a curb. They're not allowed to use the same bait station. So it's better to keep with whomever they're using if they have one. The next one just talks about if there's active termites during due diligence. And then the permit moratorium, this is when COVID was happening, like beginning of COVID. And they were having, the city had a moratorium on permits. Well, this was hurting investors because they wanted to get their permit, and time's money. And if the city was going to hold permits for another 2 months, that's 2 months of payments that they would have to make to the hard money lenders. So this permit moratorium we wrote to try to help, in an investor situation. This COVID stipulation, I don't think anyone's using anymore. Septic, it's very important to know whether or not a property is on septic. That's a whole different animal. Septic, you're going to want to make sure that it's functioning properly, it's sized properly, because if it was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house and now it's a 4-bedroom, 3-bath house, guess what? That septic system probably is not sized for that house. They probably didn't even touch a septic system, which means the moment you put a bunch of people in that house and they start using those systems, it's going to back up. So it's important to know that your septic system is, and the last one talks about sizing too, that it's sized properly. And that's something that during your inspection, you're going to want to have it inspected. A lot of people try to push this to the seller saying, sellers to get it inspected and to provide proof that it's sized properly and that it's working properly, or sellers to make the repairs. I've definitely seen where buyer has paid for this as well. But I definitely, if you're gonna enter, there's actually houses all over the place that have septic systems. So it's definitely something to understand.
The county is where you could verify if it's sized correctly, correct?
The person coming out to inspect can tell you it's sized correctly, but the county, I mean, that's probably a harder way to figure it out, but they should be able to tell you. But the county probably didn't know that they added on 2 bedrooms and another bathroom. And every bedroom's allowed to have at least 2 people, so, I mean, that's just more people using the bathrooms and everything.
Some sellers don't even know if they have something.
They don't, and actually, one of the inspections you should absolutely do every single time is a source scope. Source scope, in a lot of our inspectors that, like RIA, I know does it, I think Home Probe has one too. It's a separate cost, but what they do is they take the clean out off, they run a camera down it, they make sure that there's no roots in the lines. I mean, some of these are still the terracotta that's just put together, like not sealed, they're just put together. And if it's functioning properly, it's fine. And a lot of them is the galvanized, which, over time, the galvanized, may have started out like this, but over time it gets smaller and smaller. And that's where, if they have someone that threw baby wipes down there, it's going to get caught up, it's going to back up eventually. So and plus, it will tell you, is it running to the city? There was a story in Kirkwood, of all places, that they did not do a source scope. They bought a house, it was renovated, they had an addition, their sewer was backing up. Come to find out, if they would have scoped, they would have figured this out. It went towards the front of the house, but before it can hit the city, it turned back around and it went back to a septic tank underneath the addition. So, that in the way the city, it used to be that you could check your water bills and see whether or not if you're charged sewer. That's not the case. The city will charge you sewer no matter what, because they don't know if you're connected. So you're always going to have that fee. So really, your only way to know for sure is to do a sewer scope, and that'll tell you the how good the sewer system is and if there's problems. I mean, to replace a sewer line, just depending on how long it is from the house to the street, it could be 3,000 and above. And that doesn't include, they're gonna rip up all your shrubbery, they're gonna rip up everything, and they're not gonna replant anything. That's just to replace your line. And it could be more depending on, how far it is. Probably from here to that wall is probably $3,000, easily. So, and that just depends on if it's a clear straight, if you don't have some big oak tree that they have to work around. That, I would highly recommend it. Most of the agents we work with are doing those.
Because it was going back under, it ran up their bill?
No, because it went back underneath the house and went to a septic tank that they could never get to because they built on top of it. And they had to basically cap off that. So that septic tank is going to have to sit underneath that addition. There's no way to get rid of it. There's no way to pull it out. They had to cap it, and they had to run it to the street, the sewer line, where it should have gone, to the sewer system. Yeah. So, but there was no way to know. And these people lived there for a while before they had a problem. And, I would have never thought in Kirkwood there would have been a septic tank, but there was. So, but yeah, I would always have, and again, you just tell your clients, here's what, you should do a radon. Radon, it causes cancer. You should do the source scope. These are all separate costs. And you can explain the benefit of them. If they decide not to, that's on them. But you should at least explain what could happen. You could have, there's one person living in his house now, you're moving in 4. You're gonna overpower the system a lot faster than this one person did. So it's in your best interest for us to do the sewer scope. And I like to use inspection companies that definitely offer that service, because I don't feel like having to call a plumber on my own and trying to find someone to do it. And again, I know Home Probe and RIA definitely do it. They have relationships. Survey, highly recommend. You mentioned survey to them too. In this market, it's really hard because surveyors are really behind. they're saying like 6 to 8 weeks. Well, you know you're closing before 6 or 8 weeks. There are companies that have relationships with survey companies. I know Gannick for sure has one. They have one with solar that solar works really hard to make sure that that survey gets back in time. And a survey is important, especially if your client's thinking about putting a fence up. They're going to need a survey anyways. Or if there's a question about boundaries, property line, if it's a shared driveway, which is a whole nother nightmare. But, you know, those are things that a survey could help you understand. If there's an alley, are there any utility easements? A long time ago, we did a survey and come to find out that one of the utility easements ran underneath the corner of the house. Well, we got out of that because, I mean, who knows if it was a storm drain. I mean, I could have collapsed, and at that point, it's going to collapse that corner of the house. So we ended up terminating that contract. I mean, it's just things that you're going to learn on a survey that you're not going to learn any other way. The next one that talks about the buyer brokerage agreement. This is where we, you know, basically you just need to let your clients know. This is a good one. No one includes this in their BBA, but it's a good one. Basically, that you're recommending, Keller Williams in town recommends that they do a home inspection, that they, you know, do a radon, sewer scope, enhanced title insurance policy. Don't ever let your clients close without a title insurance policy. You have to buy one for the bank. They make you, and there's a reason, because the bank understands humans can make mistakes. The owner one is optional. I know it's a one-time fee too. It's a one-time fee that they have. I honestly would probably walk away from a deal if I had a client that said that. That's how strongly I feel about title insurance.
And sorry to interrupt
Yeah.
you, but in the instance with the survey where if you can't get it done, always ask the seller if they have a copy.
Yep.
And if you're just unable to get it done because of the timeframes, that's when you want to make sure that the lender is doing the enhanced policy and the closing attorney does one for the house as well, because that will give limited protections if there is a survey issue later.
Yeah, exactly. And then the appraisal gap, this is what a lot of people are doing now too. I call this negative equity gap, but basically if the property doesn't appraise, that your client's willing, I just asked my client, how much are you willing to throw in and bring to closing more? And usually it's like $5,000. I've seen people put $30,000, but that's basically negative equity. I mean, you have if it doesn't appraise and you put this appraisal gap in there, then you're agreeing that you'll bring up to that amount to closing, not to exceed the purchase price. It's helping people win offers left and right. Usually between this and the escalation clause, that's what's, you know, winning offers at the moment. You should always just tell your client about it, but explain what it is. It literally is negative equity if that comes to be. If it does not appraise and they agree to bring a certain amount, they just need to understand that doesn't mean they have more equity in the house. Because the lender is only going to lend on the appraised value. They're not going to lend on anything else. HOA documents, this is if, you know, a slimmer version of the other HOA that, you know, basically you want the rules and regulations, you want the latest budget in the last 12 months of the meeting minutes. You learn a lot reading those meeting minutes. Make sure your client skims through those. You can see what they're thinking, because they may be thinking about coming up with an assessment. Well, if it hasn't been approved, they don't have to disclose it. So you can find out a lot by reading the meeting minutes. So that's why it's important to have those.
Also, when you present those to your buyer, however they get them, if they pull them off on a website, because sometimes that's where they are, they can do it on their own, sometimes the agent will give it to you. Make sure that you have an email in writing that you ask your buyer just to say, hey, please confirm you have reviewed all of these things.
Yeah.
And also make sure you as the agent are reviewing them as well.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to be in a situation where your buyer says, oh yeah, I've read all of it, and then you find out that they have a dog that's too big for the neighborhood, because that might have happened to me.
Yes. Yep. No, and that can happen. And then business days, not calendar days, this is if you want to make sure that if your due diligence falls on a Saturday, that it gets pushed to the following Monday, and if the following Monday is a holiday, it gets pushed to the next day. I see this every once in a while, I don't see it a lot, but there are agents that do that. And this, we'll talk about this more when we talk about the seller's property disclosure. This goes back to what Case was saying, is if you don't get a seller's property disclosure statement, you should say the following items to remain at closing and to cost the buyer, and literally go to the page of the seller's disclosure that lists the items and glance down and say, okay, switch plate covers. And I know some of this sounds silly, but you need to literally list switch plate covers, refrigerator, range, whatever, if you're not getting a seller's disclosure. Otherwise, to Case's point, they can take it. We had when I was broker here, we had an agent that represented a buyer. The seller was staying over. Seller called and said, hey, does your buyers want to buy these light fixtures? They were high-end light fixtures. Did they want to buy these light fixtures, like the chandeliers, like $2,000, whatever? And he's like, what are you talking about? She's like, well, I didn't put on there that these were staying. And she didn't. She almost took them all. Which, you can imagine walking around your house, all those light fixtures, that's a lot of money. And plus, these were high-end light fixtures. He was able to, with the help of an attorney friend, get her to back off of that, but she legally could have taken every light fixture out of that house. So it is really, I know it sounds stupid, but it's really important to even list light bulbs. Because in the end, people like each other to begin with. In the end, I had a seller that almost took all the switch plate covers off because he got mad at the buyer before closing, and he didn't say they were staying. I know that's petty, but it would have been annoying to go to Home Depot and have to replace 100 switch plate covers. So you may start out nice, you don't know what it's going to end up being. So you got to protect your client from the beginning. This is a new one on the bottom of page 6. This is one that I pulled off of someone's contract that we received. We had the seller and one of the contract to close people I work with, and I was like, oh, wow, that's a good step. So I'm incorporating that. In today's market, it is getting really hard for lenders to approve HOAs. So, and especially in the tight time frame that they're given, like they're only given so many days due diligence, so many days financing contingency, and most people are giving up their financing contingencies. Well, the lender has no protection. This will protect the lender and your client, basically saying that if the development, a real estate development where this condo is not approved, that the buyer can terminate and get their full refund of their earnest money. Without this, if it's not approved and you have no financing contingency and you're outside of due diligence, guess what? You're giving up your earnest money. So it's really important to, and I just literally saw, because I told another agent about this, she just incorporated this into her contract and they accepted it. So, but it is getting harder. The appraisal gap, I did a simplified version on page 7 of, because I didn't like the other one. So I did a very easy to understand appraisal gap if you have to do it, stipulation. But you can use either. Seth wrote the other one. Okay, so exclusive buyer brokerage agreement and exclusive seller brokerage agreement. So KW does not allow, and actually no brokerage that I work with allows sub-agency. Does anyone know what that means?
I feel like I did, but I forgot.
So it's really, I probably didn't really understand what it meant until like last year. That's how, it's just like, oh, they just said to check this, I'm gonna check it. But if your client asks you, you're gonna be like, I don't really know what that means. So I printed out the ABC's Understanding the Real Estate Brokerage Agreement, and I honestly never looked at this until the other day when I was pulling this class together, and I'm like, oh, well, there's all the definitions of what these mean. It would be very good to read through these because you are gonna come across a client sometime in your career that's going to make you go through every single paragraph of it, and you should go through everything, but they're going to ask you what these mean. So sub-agencies on page 2, and this used to be that the real estate broker is, when a sub-agency occurs when one real estate broker is appointed by another real estate broker as a sub-agent to perform. So basically the seller can pick the buyer's broker to be the sub-agent. That's why it's not, no one allows it. They all check, it is not allowed. So, I don't even know why it's on there anymore, but it is, so, in case someone asks, definitely read through here, it talks about designated agency. Designated agency is only if the agents work for the same office, not the agents work for KW, the agents work for KWIT, they both work for in town. It can't be one's at Peachtree Road and one's here, that's not designated. It's only if they're in the same office. So that's what designated means. And then, go ahead.
What does it mean to assign a contract? That's just a little bit different than like this sub-agency scenario.
Yeah, you're talking about like a buyer wants to assign it to someone else. Yeah, there's a stipulation if they're wanting to do that, that they would have to put in there, because that would have to have the seller's permission, which I don't know very many people that allow that to happen.
Okay.
Because you don't know who the person they're assigning it is.
Okay.
And a lot of wholesalers like to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of wholesalers, but they have their own contracts,
Okay.
which allows them to do that. But yeah. So definitely read through the broker relationships. I just thought that was key to point out. The affiliated business disclosure is not required, but it is good practice and this just talks about, and actually this should be updated because I'm sure Friar is now, anyways, this is an older one, but there should be a newer one out there for you because the attorney's different. This basically discloses relationships that the office has with different, the lenders and the attorney. Again, good business practice, not required as far as your contracts. And then the next page is and you would just have your client sign the bottom. The client you're working with, the other side doesn't have to sign it. So there's 2 pages of that. I work with a lot of agents. I have one that uses this. To me, it's in this market, it is a very good practice to use. Seth Wiseman wrote this, and basically it's disclosure to buyers purchasing property in a seller's market, and it goes through if you're purchasing it as is, you need to be, without having inspection, there's a greater risk. I mean, it just is another layer of protection that you should use, especially in this market. When the market turns, then you don't have to worry about it. And then it talks about, if you delete the appraisal contingency and if you don't look at the property, I mean, there's so much risk involved. And this basically is another layer of, okay, I told you this, don't come back to me and say, well, you didn't tell me. No, we told you. And again, that's optional as well, but I think it's a good idea to use it. Exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. So, how many of you have had transactions and you've done your buyer brokerage agreement and everything already? Okay, so you're gonna probably know a lot of this. Just pay attention to the language, and with any form, if behind the line it says broker, that's not your name. That will be Keller Williams in town Atlanta. So just know that, just read anytime there's a line and behind it, it says broker. I know a lot of people like to put their name there, and I'm like, no, that's the broker. You're the affiliated agent. So your term needs to start ideally before you start showing them properties, but absolutely no later than the day you're writing an offer. I know a lot of agents wait until the last moment and do it, but honestly, you should not be giving any advice to anyone without a buyer brokerage agreement because you're not protected. You're not supposed to be telling them anything. You're not supposed to be talking about comps. You're not supposed to be talking about anything. You basically, if you're going to do this without a buyer brokerage agreement, you're just opening the door. And you're not saying anything else. You're not giving an opinion about the neighborhood. You shouldn't be giving an opinion about neighborhoods anyways, but you're not giving any opinions. So the beginning date and then the end date, most people do 6 months buyer brokerage agreement. Some people do longer, especially if you have a relationship. I have someone that has a relationship with someone that buys multiple properties. She does hers for the whole year, just so she doesn't have to do it again. So it just depends. The sub-agency is what you have to check. So this is not offered by broker. I have a lot of people that check buyer agency, and I'm like, well, that's what you're doing. Is a buyer agency. That is offered because that's what the buyer brokerage. I don't even know why that's on here. Why the buyer brokerage is here. So sub-agency you have to check. Dual agency is allowed. It's not really recommended because there's a lot of risk involved, and it's really hard to be a client to both the buyer and the seller. there's so much room for a lawsuit, and honestly, I would recommend making one a customer and the other one a client and not doing dual agency. A lot of people forget 3B. You gotta check one of those boxes. This is basically that if the broker offers and they allow dual agency, does the buyer or does not consent? I always say does not, because I just don't wanna go there. I will never go there. I will not ever do dual agency. Commission, this is different from last year. Under 4B, I have some agents putting the 3% in there. I have some agents putting 0. Now remember, this is the buyer brokerage agreement. The seller's paying your commission. So the paragraph above, basically, if you put 3% in here, it's basically saying that the buyer's gonna pay you the difference. So say it's a property and they're only paying 2.5%. If you put 3% in here, that means that you could go back to your buyer and have them pay the other 0.5% if you have the 3 in here. If you have 0 in here, you're not gonna go back to them, you're not gonna ask them to pay the difference. I have been doing this a little bit, and I personally would never go back to my client and ask them to pay the difference. That's just me, but it's your business, you have to decide what you wanna do. I do have a couple agents that have done it, and their clients have been fine with it. That's just not me. You just gotta determine what's best for you and your business. Leases, I don't know if any of you worked on a lease before, but that is a thankless job and you don't get paid any money. I helped someone in Swanee, I live downtown, so that was painful. I literally probably showed them 20 houses for lease. I got $300. Guess how much gas I spent? It was more than $300. But they're my clients and they're gonna buy. Granted, they were gonna buy this year, but it got to the point where we were getting beat out of everything, and I told them you need to rent another year. And I said, and I don't want involved. Just sign a new renewal. I don't even bring my name into it because I don't care at this point, because I got my measly $300, which was gone. But it's up to you again. If you want to get involved, just know that it's a long run thing. You're not going to get rich doing leases. You're doing it as a relationship thing, and that's it. So usually, if I'm writing my buyer brokerage agreement, I'm putting 0 in NA, because I don't really want to do a lease. I'd rather someone else do the lease. But if you want to, you can just put in here like $300 or whatever, because it's probably all you're going to get anyways.
Can I ask a quick question around that? So we have the exclusive tenant brokerage agreement, which you would use if they were just solely looking at rentals. But if you fill that in, and let's say you put, $500 there, the way that the tenant agreement works, that it's the difference of whatever.
Yeah.
So let's say you put 500, but they were paying you 3. Does the buyer only come up with 2 on this agreement, or do they come up with the full 5?
Oh no, they would come up with. You would have them sign a separate tenant agreement, which would end up meaning they would only put up the 200 difference between it. Yeah, because this is just protecting you in case you didn't intend for them to lease. You intended for them to buy, but all of a sudden the market's not going to work for them, and this protects you. Whereas if you didn't have this in here and they decided to lease, you would be SOL. You wouldn't get anything. But if you decided they were going to lease, you would have them sign the tenant agreement.
Okay, so yeah, this is just more like a backup.
This is a backup in case like me along the way decided you just need to keep renting. This market's not for you. So yeah, this is just a little protection, but you would do a tenant brokerage agreement with them. Protection period, I usually do 60 or 90 days. And does everyone understand what that means, protection period?
No.
Okay. So say you showed your client a lot of properties and your agreement ended yesterday. Well, say they went behind your back and they start negotiating with the person that you showed the property to. This protection period, because you had showed them their property, can protect you and you can go after them for commission. Most people don't spend the energy to do that, but it's good to at least put in there that they know you're serious. Look, this is what this means, and people are, I would never do that to you, which hopefully they wouldn't. But yeah, that's what that means.
What happens if this is signed and they work with their cousin
and it goes back to a property you had showed them, you have to be able to prove that you showed them that property, but you can contact them and say, look, we have a buyer brokerage agreement, and actually if their cousin's an agent, you can share the buyer brokerage agreement with them and say, look, I showed them this property, we have this brokerage agreement, well, within my protection period, I am owed a commission. And we have had agents that have been taken to the real estate commission and they've had to pay their commission, the whole commission, to the other agent.
What if it's within the engagement period, like the year hasn't, it's still within the year?
Yeah, if it's within engagement period and they have the sign, they're working with you. You're the one that's protected.
What happens if they do work with another agent?
Then the other agent needs to understand that they're still under your agreement, and you're owed a commission. The other agent, I mean, if they lie to the other agent can go after them, but unless you release them from the agreement, they're still under your agreement.
Okay.
And again, a lot of people are just like, whatever, just go. But no, unless they're released from this or it expires, they're still under it. They still have to abide by. So basically the rest of it is just, and again, I would highly recommend, one day you are going to have that client that is going to go through every word. I would just make sure you understand. Plus you should go through each section and say, this is what this means. You know, just have your 2 or 3 sentence, this is what this means. This is what this means to you. And then it talks, you know, what are the broker's duties to the buyer? What are the buyer's duties? The buyer has duties too. So just, you know, walk through each section, and I usually just, you know, give like a 1 or 2 sentence, this is what this section means, do you have any questions? Most of the time they don't read it, but if they do, they might have a question. And then it talks about, you know, what are the limits to our responsibility to them. And then it talks on number 4, the limit on broker's liability is, you know, can't be greater than the amount of the real estate commission. I've definitely had people that want to cross this out. Don't let anyone cross out anything on his contract unless you talk to the broker or your productivity coach, because you don't want, there's a reason this language is in here. It's to protect the brokerage and protect you. And it, you know, sometimes it's something stupid, and you know, I've definitely gone to Mark before and been like, okay, they want to cross out this, and he's like, fine, whatever, I don't care. But you know, the limits to liability, oh, absolutely not. You're not crossing that out.
Yeah.
And if they are becoming that difficult, you need to evaluate whether or not you want to work with this person. People don't get better, usually. They become more difficult.
Yeah, there are some states where they could go after you for just ungodly amounts of money, but this sets forth, like, hey, if there's an issue, this is really all that you could go. Now, it's not to say that they couldn't try for more, but
Yeah.
it does add a layer of protection. So.
Yep. And then it just talks about arbitration. I mean, it talks about relationships. I mean, they look at these forms and they usually update them twice a year. There is a reason why they make the changes they make to these forms. And then on page 6, highly recommend you, under 10, send them all the brochures. You may not be looking at a property that's a new construction right now, but you don't know. And are you going to remember to go back and send them that brochure? No, you're not. Just send them all the brochures. What I do is I pull them into one file and I label it 2022 buyer brochures. I send them that file. As long as you can show that you sent it to them, then you're protected. Like, they can't come back later and say, oh, well, you didn't tell me anything about radon. Yeah, I did, and I even shared a pamphlet with you. I'm sorry you didn't read it. But again, it's just a layer of protection. So definitely do that. And this is where you would put special stipulations. I've definitely worked with clients that are like, I want to limit it to this one house. I'm like, fine. So you just would put this agreement is only valid for 123 Main Street, and then you'd have to do one for the next house. I mean, you're going to have that client every once in a while that will just want to do it just for that one particular house because they don't want to be tied to a person. The last page, make sure that you print your buyer's names because sometimes their signatures are, you can't read them. Address is not necessary, but you should put the phone number and the email address on there as well. So just make sure you include that. You need to fill in all your information on the brokerage information below. And as long as the signatures have, state stamps, then you don't have to worry about, the bottom, filling out the date. And that's with anything, as long, an amendment or whatever, as long as there's a date next to the signature, you don't have to worry about that. I cannot see what time it is, but I'm gonna have to keep plowing through,
It's
so.
3 o'clock.
It is 3, okay.
Yeah.
So I may be stepping out a minute. Seller brokerage agreement, very similar. Fill out everything, fill out the address, the city, county, zip code, tax ID. This is all information that's available to you. You can go online and search for it. This is important. Deed book and page, that's, you can either do that or you can get the legal description. Obviously, it's always better to have the legal description, but if you only have the deed book and page, you can use that as well. Those top 2 are your best options to do legal. If you, most of the time you're gonna get a listing and you're probably not gonna do anything with it until like next week. Get with the attorney that you work with the most. Send them, I have this, 123 Main Street, the rest of the address, can you please send me the legal? They'll send you the legal. They'll do it. They'll do it for free, and they'll usually do it within the same day. The list price, you can't leave any of this blank either, starting with number 2. List price, when are you going to start listing? When does it end? Most listings I would do for at least 6 months. In this market, they usually go within a week, but I would probably put 6 months. Marketing, when you have an exclusive seller brokerage agreement, you need to put it in FMLS and Georgia MLS. So you would put FMLS and Georgia MLS. 3B, marketing commencement date. Say you're going to do a coming soon. Marketing commencement date is the day it's going to become active. If it's going to become active the same day that you want the commencement date of the agreement, you would just put the same day there. When it's coming soon, no one is allowed in that house. I know agents are breaking this rule all day long. No one. You are not allowed to let anyone sneak a peek. You're not allowed to let any agents in because that's not the intent of coming soon. Coming soon is just giving you some momentum in the market, but you're not supposed to let anyone in. It's to let them maybe clean up a few things, paint a few things, whatever they want to do. But again, no one is supposed to go in during that time. And then this is new on 3B. I would just probably put within 5 days, give or take. So that way, say they need a few more days to finish the painting or cleaning or getting, stuff into storage. Does that make sense? Commission 4A, the first box is what everyone checks. Say the seller's going to give you 6%. That's where the 6 would go. So 4A, that's the 6% of the sales price. 4B, a lot of people make the mistake and they put 3%. And I'm like, no. Unless you're not taking a commission, which you would be. It's 6%, and then the 4B is usually, they put 3%. You give the other agent 3%. Whatever you negotiate. Whatever's on your, this is what goes in the system too. Whatever's on this agreement is what is supposed to happen. And then if 4C, no one ever fills this out, but if there's an adjustment or concession, like say, I've seen agents put in the listing under private remarks, if I show my listing to your clients, you're getting 1%. Well, if that's the case, then you need to put that here, so that the seller understands what you're going to do. That the other agent's going to get 1%, which is not going to make them happy, but that's where you would put this. Again, no one does that, and I've only seen it. I've not really seen any KW agents doing that, but I've seen people doing that. And then separate commission on lease, again, it talks about if they decide, well, it's not selling, I'm going to lease it. Usually when you are representing the landlord, you get a full month's rent. And unfortunately, you only give the other agent not much, like $300 of it. So that's what the separate. And again, a lot of people don't fill that out because they're like, oh no, we're selling your house. We're not going there for a lease. But if you think there's that possibility, you would want to fill this out.
Quick question.
Yeah.
With that, so if, let's say you're doing first full month's rent, do you take that and then add in what you would offer the other brokerage, or do you just put the full amount and then you put in the as follows, just say we are gonna give an
Yeah, you would, but you also will have a separate agreement again, because it would be a lease listing agreement,
Okay.
which would cover that, but that is a good thing to do, to put in here. So that way, if it does come that path, you do have to do the other agreement, if you do it going down that path.
Cool.
And then protection period, same, I usually do like 90 days, 60 or 90 days. Again, the agency, it's sub-agency, and then make sure you check the box, does or does not. A lot of agents forget that. Your office compliance will ding you most likely on that. Any special circumstances, divorce, and bankruptcy, if any, most of the time these aren't checked because they're not any of those. But if they are, you need to make sure you check those. Negotiation absolutely is another one people forget. 8, you want to have the seller authorize you to negotiate for them. That's the whole purpose of you doing their listing, honestly. And then again, the rest of it is just talking about marketing and MLS services and the lockbox and commission, protection period. So it basically explains everything that you're filling out, has an explanation behind it. So just make sure you skim through and understand what you're having them sign, because they may ask why they're signing it. So let's see here. Oh, this one's a lot bigger. And then on page 9, again, send them the brochures. And I literally send them all, even though this might not be a short sale, who knows? It may become a short sale, you don't know. So it's just best to just send them everything. Exhibits, if you checked on the front page that a legal is gonna be attached, then under 11, you would check legal, you would give it an exhibit letter. If the house is pre-1978, you would have a lead-based paint attached. No one uses retainer fee, so ignore that one. Under other, you would, if there's seller's property disclosure, I would go ahead and write that out and give it an exhibit letter. So these are all things that before you list it, you should have all this done. Don't be that agent where you have multiple offers and everyone's asking you, can I have the community association disclosure? You'll be like, you haven't done that yet. No, before you do a listing, make sure you get everything. Make sure you get all the HOA docs. Make sure you get all these exhibits filled out. There's no reason that you shouldn't have these uploaded onto the system, so that way when an agent makes an appointment, if you put it in the system right under the showing time, it'll automatically send them the disclosures. So you don't have to take the call of, can you send me the disclosures? I'm getting ready to write you an offer. No, it already got sent to you. You have them. Or make sure they're uploaded on Fmls so that you have them. Yeah, definitely be the better agent and have all that done. Because nothing's more frustrating than to have to write a stip of, you need to give me the community association disclosure. The agent knew they needed one of those. I don't know why they didn't do it. And they should have a legal. When you have a listing, go ahead and get the legal pulled. Have everything that you would want included in an offer, provide that to the other agent. So, again, on the seller information, make sure you type their name, give a phone number and an email address. Absolutely fill out all the information for the brokerage. We're going to go into structure of an offer. And if I'm going too fast, just slow me down. Sorry, I just want to make sure we get through this. So, structure of an offer, have your buyer brokerage agreement, executed prior to showing homes, giving advice, send all the consumer brochures, sign the affiliated business agreement. That's the one we talked about the relationship. In the seller's market, it's definitely advisable to do that disclosure to buyers in the seller's market. Absolutely, do not take anywhere unless you have a pre-approval or a pre-qual letter. Don't waste your time. If they're serious, they're going to talk to a lender. Don't, plus you're going to need it to make an offer. No one in this market is going to accept an offer that does not have a pre-approval or a pre-qual letter. And honestly, a pre-approval letter is the one you want anyways. So even if your clients are like a few months down the road, I would start getting them working with a lender. Let's go ahead and try to get them to getting a commitment, which is the strongest yet. You want them to have the best opportunity to win an offer, and they'd be set up for failure if they did not have one of these. Definitely print the FMLS, Georgia MLS listing. I always like to print it because it has the commission down there, so if I am representing the buyer and later they try to tell me it's 2.5%, I'll be like, okay, it's dated and this is dated right when I wrote the offer and it says 3%, but why are you saying 2.5%? So it could help you if you have a dispute. Tax records, absolutely, we'll talk about tax records in a minute. Definitely pull the tax records, there's information on there that will help you. Ask for all the disclosures. They should be online, but if they're not, ask for them. Review all the disclosures with the buyer. Then you have your, this is all before you write a purchase and sale agreement. This is all the stuff you should be thinking about. And then you have purchase and sale agreement. Are there any special stipulations? Again, in this market, it's usually there's none, but you know, there's definitely a lot of good special stipulations out there. If you have to write one, make sure you get the broker to review it, or you know, assistant team leader, productivity coach to review it prior to using. It is very easy to write a special stipulation that is not good. Actually, case when I was broker here, I taught a special stipulations class and it was good. It was really good. So we may have to talk about that later.
We will. Yeah, I tell everyone use what BAR gives you,
Yeah.
because there's a reason it's written that way. If there's something that we have collectively as an office, like what Cherie provided,
Yeah.
like that's fine, because Mark's seen all of those
Yeah.
before. Don't get in the habit of trying to write your own.
Yeah.
And if you do, always ask an attorney, review it with someone else before you decide to put it on a contract.
Yeah. So, absolutely. Because that's where contracts go sideways, is when the stipulations are not very clear and the other side doesn't understand something totally different than what you thought you wrote. And if the disclosure is not available as of offer date, you need to write it in a special stip that they're going to be provided. Don't just assume the agent's like, oh, they're going to get them to me tomorrow. No, I don't. That's fine. I don't have them today. I don't have them when I'm writing this offer. We're going to write a stipulation that I'm getting them. Because if you don't have it in the contract, you're not entitled to get them. They don't have to give them to you. So you need to ask for them and make sure you put it in there. We talked about the lead-based paint, how important that one is. Earnest money, who's holding it? If it's closing attorney, you got to do the F510, which is where the buyer and seller agree that the closing attorney is going to hold the money, and F511, which is the agreement where the attorney is agreeing to hold the earnest money. There's pluses and minuses of a closing attorney holding the earnest money. It's always best to let your broker hold your earnest money. I had a situation with another agent, actually it was Palmer House agent, and clearly if I were reviewing the contract, the seller would have gotten the earnest money, because we even had an amendment that stated if this happened, the buyer agreed to it. Cut and dry. The closing attorney is going to make them go to arbitration because they don't want to make that call. So that's going to waste all that earnest money. Whereas if it was held by the office, the broker is going to look at the contract, they're going to review it, and they're going to make a decision. And they absolutely would have made a decision that the seller would have gotten it. But because the closing attorney doesn't have to abide by the same rules, they said, we're just going to go to arbitration, because they were hoping that they would come to an agreement, which they didn't. So, and if it's a cash buyer, because the attorney represents the party, like the lender, or if it's a cash buyer, they're going to represent the cash buyer. They're absolutely going to make you go to arbitration, because they're not going to decide against the party they're representing. So it's better just to have your brokerage hold. Counteroffer, if the seller doesn't accept your initial offer, they'll submit a counteroffer if they want to work with your buyer. We're going to talk about that. Amendment to address concerns when there's a due diligence period. That's the amendment you use to ask for repairs. We're not going to talk about this one in this class, but right to request repairs, it is not the same as the due diligence period. It is very tricky, this form, and it's very easy to misuse. So again, this is on another class, but if you do right to request repairs, it's not the same as due diligence. Due diligence is your free look period. Right to request repairs, there are specific things that can get you out of the contract, and it's not a free look at all. It has to be very specific defects, and it has to be the seller did not agree to do them. If you put 50 items down there and the seller agrees to do them, guess what? You're buying that house. That's the difference. So, instruction of closing attorney is your commission agreement. Your pre-offer checklist, again, you want your BBA, your anti-fraud, your buyer's market, you want to preview the house with the buyer. I know you may not have been able to be there the first time, but you want to preview it. You're going to see things that the buyer's not going to see. If the listing agent's not providing you with a legal, reach out to a closing attorney and get it. I'm going to show you on Fmls where you can get the debook and page if it's listed. That's your other option, is not to have it attached, but to put the debook and page. Take the disclosures with you during your preview, because that will help you understand where, you'll go through the list, especially page 7, but you'll go through the list and you'll be like, oh, wait a minute. There are blinds. They didn't check that those were remaining. Well, we're going to want to make sure we put a stipulation that those are remaining. You'll be surprised what people want to take. Review your tax records. If there's a survey, review it. I know you're not an expert at surveys, neither am I. You need to make sure that if there's a survey attached, the closing attorney gets a copy of it, because they are more versed in looking for things and will be able to tell you, but make sure it's during your due diligence period. Absolutely talk to the buyer's lender. You cannot write an offer, and especially do a conventional loan exhibit without talking to the lender. You can't just make up numbers that sound good. If the lender can't live up to those numbers, then you just put yourself and your client in a bad position. You got to make sure that they can live up to what you're putting in the contract. Number 10 is not that, closing attorneys, it used to be that they wanted you to confirm the date. They do not like to close on the last day of the month. They do not like to close on the first day of the month, because those are their busy days. Anymore, they just make it work. Sometimes they charge more if it's a fast closing. Tax records.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
What did you say to talk to the buyer and lender about fees?
Oh, no. So talk to the buyer's lender, because when you're filling out the, I'm just going to say conventional loan. You're filling out the conventional loan, you need to understand, is it an 80% loan? What is the interest rate? Is it 30 years? How many days do they need for financing contingency? How many days do they need for appraisal contingency? Because if they're not on board with what you're putting in there and you turn a contract over to them, I've had this happen lately, that an agent didn't even talk to the lender, and they're like, I can't do that. I can't give you an appraisal back in 5 days. No, we're now 10 days plus. So you got to make sure that you do not set your client or yourself or the lender up for failure, because the seller does not have to agree once you go under contract to extend anything. In fact, most of them have a backup agreement, and it's usually more than what your offer is, and they'd be happy for you to walk. They'd be like, fine, see ya. So yes, it's just important that the main key players, that everyone understands. And again, when I'm writing an offer, I'll call the lender and I'll say, okay, I'm writing the offer, let's talk through this. And plus it gives them a heads up that a contract may be coming their way. So under tax records, so this is a listing I pulled up. So some of the things when I'm looking at a listing, I look at is, I'm like, okay, this says DeKalb County. That immediately makes me wonder, is this unincorporated DeKalb? And I'll show you where to find out on your tax records. So that would be a first question. Anything that's in DeKalb County, you need to be asking yourself, is this unincorporated DeKalb? Because if so, there's another exhibit you need to add. That is important. I look at the year built, I'm like, oh, 1950, I better have a lead-based paint exhibit. Under private remarks, I know it's the buyer's choice, but if you're trying to win an offer and they're telling you the closing attorney who they want to use, I'd probably be using their closing attorney, because you want to try to appease to what they were wanting, and honestly this is probably what the agent wanted, but anyways, you're trying to appease to what they want and make it a cleaner offer. Towards the bottom of the page, that's your tax ID. That would go on the contract as well. A lot of the other stuff, because it tells you need to validate this information, I don't even pay attention to it. In a normal market, I would be looking at the history. Has this house gone under contract? How many times has it been under contract? Then I'm going to start wanting to ask questions to the other agent. Say, hey, I noticed this under contract 2 times. What happened? Did it fall through because of an inspection? If so, is there a report that you might share with us? You're trying to do a little investigating before. And that's all in FMLS. It's one of those little icons under the picture. It's not under this one, but it's under the picture that you can click on that gives you the history. And you can see when it came on the market, went off the market, when it came back on the market, went off the market. So that sometimes helps as well. So the next page is tax records. Okay. So remember how I said if it's DeKalb County, I immediately want to know if it's unincorporated. The second section, it says location information. To the right, it shows DeKalb County. Underneath it, it says unincorporated. That means it's unincorporated DeKalb, which means you need to have the DeKalb plumbing disclosure as an exhibit. And the DeKalb plumbing disclosure is important because if the fixtures are not low flow, DeKalb will not let you turn on the water. You have to give them a certificate, which you get from your lender. Your inspector. So if before I walk into an inspection, I make sure if it's unincorporated DeKalb that I tell the inspector, look, we're going to need a low flow certificate. If they're not able to give you one, your client will have to update the fixtures, and that means shower heads, toilets, faucets, to be low flow, and have a certificate showing from the plumber that they changed all this out, and then they'll let you put the water on. So it's important for your client to understand, especially if they're buying something that's pretty old and they're not intending on replacing these items, they may not be able to get their water turned on. So it's an extra cost that might end up falling on your buyer that they need to understand. Also, under location information, this talks about, it gives you a flood zone code. And this one says X, which I'll show you in a minute. X is fine. Because I have codes in here for you. But there's so much you can learn from this. I mean, you can see how much they paid for it before. What's the estimated value? What does it show as a square footage? Down below, towards the bottom under characteristics, I wouldn't put money on this. I used to, but I wouldn't anymore. Sewer, it says public service. Well, I'd still get a sewer scope because I've seen this wrong before too. So you can't exactly go by that. And then the second page, so when you bring up a listing, it'll have listing information, then there'll be a tab that says tax. If you click on tax, that's where you're gonna get this information, and on the second page, it tells you the debooking page. So if you ever need to write an offer and you don't have time to pull a legal description, just go to the second page, and at the bottom it says debooking page. You can just use that. And then later, if you get the attorney to pull it for you, you can just add it as an exhibit. You can just say, legal to be added an exhibit E or whatever your next letter is. So
one thing I would just tell you guys is definitely pay attention to that, because sometimes people will go and they'll see the other debooking pages. So you always want to make sure this is matching what the most recent sale is.
Yeah.
It's the most recent sales debooking page that you're going to be referencing.
Yeah.
But Cherie said, make sure if you do it that way, just get the tax, the legal description later added as
Yep.
an amendment.
Yeah, because you can't always get it, and I see people writing in there, sellers to provide legal. Well, 99% of the time, seller never provides you the legal. You're getting it pulled anyways by your attorney. So I would just use this debooking page, and then, to Case's point, get the attorney to pull the debooking page when you have time, and then just add it as an exhibit. Just do an amendment and add an exhibit. And this is another view of the tax records. Again, I just highlighted, if it's DeKalb County, always ask yourself, this is unincorporated. It shows you the flood zone code. On the second page of that, it talks about, what did they pay for it? Because I always have clients ask me, so what did they pay for it? And they get all hung up about, oh my God, they just bought this. I literally had one that bought it 4 months ago, and they were charging $100,000 more than what they paid for it, which turned my clients off, and they didn't want to buy the house. But you have access to this information. Unless it's they bought it 1 million years ago, you can see how much they paid for it. And honestly, in this market, it doesn't matter what they paid for it. It's what the market will let it sell for. The next page, I like the next page because it shows you, what does the lot look like? Go up a little. There you go. What's the lot look like? Well, it's supposed to be 65 by 156. This is not a survey, but at least gives you an idea of what the lot looks like. Okay, so the next page is a Fema flood zone codes. And, you know, this one said X, and that's moderate to low risk area, and it gives you what each of these means. Every once in a while I see an AE. When I was broker here, we did have a contract where literally the day before closing, the lender was like, oh, did you get your flood insurance? And the person was like, no, I didn't know this was in a flood area. Well, that's information they could have gotten during their due diligence period, so they lost their earnest money because they didn't want the house anymore. Again, during your due diligence period, tell them, call your insurance agent, go ahead and get a quote for the house. Also ask them, I'm not gonna have to have separate flood insurance. The lender should know that too. Do I need to have separate flood insurance? That will help you seal the deal on whether or not it is in a flood zone. So these codes are, you know, just for your information. In case we're gonna go to purchase and sale. So the purchase and sale agreement, again, anything that's majorly critical is on this first page. Fill out everything. I literally, when I'm writing a contract, I will fill this out, and then I go line item by line item with whomever the contract's being written for, and I always find a mistake, and I'm like, how many times have I been doing this? It's easy, like I'll forget the offer date. I'm like, dang it. So just go line by line. Offer date is the day you're writing it. Address, obviously, you fill in all of 1A. I've seen agents recently, for whatever reason, not putting the tax ID. Well, this is all important. This helps describe the property. This helps make sure everyone's on the same page. Legal description, it's always best to do B1, but if you can't, do B3 and put the deed book and page, and then you can add the other later. Purchase price, closing costs in this market is 0, but used to be you could put something in there. Okay, not in this market, but another market, if you are going to put closing costs, that's another discussion to have with the lender. How much are they going to be allowed to have? Because you don't want to put more closing costs in than they're going to be allowed to have in the end. So if you put like $8,000 and the lender's like, no, they can only use $6,000, well, you just gave away $2,000 that maybe you could have taken off the purchase price instead. Because whatever you put here and they don't use at closing, it goes back to the seller. So you always want to make sure whatever you're putting here that that the lender's like, yes, they're okay to have that amount. So that's key. Closing date, put a date. Don't put 45 days from binding, just put a date. Put a date. Usually it's at closing possession. If it's not, then you would check however many days after closing, and then, you know, you would have to do a temporary occupancy agreement. Temporary occupancy agreement is only up to 60 days. After 60 days, it's considered a lease. So in today's market, sellers are staying for free. It used to be that you can have them pay the principal, interest, taxes, and insurance for the time that they're staying. But again, in this market, they just get to stay. Closing attorney, law firm, and then phone number. The earnest money holder, again, you would put Keller Williams in town or whomever's holding it. I don't put as of offer date. That's just impossible usually to collect the check as of offer date. Just put B, 7B, and put within, you know, $5,000 or whatever within, and I would give yourself some time. If you know your client's out of town and you have a weekend coming up and you're not gonna be here, don't say you're gonna have it within one day and you're not gonna get it. Don't set yourself up for failure, because if you don't get the earnest money in on time, you have to give notice, written notice, that you do not have the earnest money, and that does not look good in anyone's eyes. So definitely make sure it's reasonable. Usually it's like 3 or 4 days, but just make sure it's reasonable for your circumstance and your client. And then if you say this is a backup, if this is a backup, you would check C and you would say $3,000 to be submitted within 3 days of receiving primary notice that receiving notice that this contract is primary. That's when you would use C, because again, you don't want to collect earnest money on something that you're not even primary on, because there's a chance you could become primary, but there's a bigger chance that you're not. Due diligence period used to be 10 days, believe it or not. Now it's like 5 or 3. So it just depends on how fast you can get an inspector out there. Again, you have relationships with inspectors. You need to definitely provide, anytime you provide information to your client, always give them at least 3 choices. They need to make the decision. I know a lot of agents make the decision for them, but you're not supposed to, because then it could fall back on you if there's liability. Have them make the decision, what inspector they want to go with. Try to, if they say, I know I'm going to use RIA, call RIA and say, okay, how far behind are you? Are you able to come out tomorrow? Especially if you only have 3 days. Just make sure you're able to get whatever days you put in here, you're going to be able to do it. Because again, any negotiation after this is under contract, it has to be between a buyer and seller, and it has to be an agreement. And most sellers, if they're knocking you down to 3 days, they're not going to give you any more days. They're done. They'll just say, go ahead, walk. Option money, it has showed up more. So option money is not the same as earnest money. Option money is different. Option money gets written directly to the seller. That check is written to John Smith and is handed over within however many days it says on here. And there's a checkbox. So I've seen option money be crazy, like $10,000. And this is basically, I'm giving you $10,000. They are sure they're not backing out of that house, because if they do not buy that house and they give you option money, you keep that option money. So the people that are putting like 10 grand down or whatever, they're serious, because who would do that? Most of the time it's $500. People will walk away from $500. But again, it gets made out to the seller. Do not bring in a check to KW. They don't want to see that. And then if they do close, there's 2 boxes. I usually see shall. So if they close and say it was $10,000, your client, once they get that check, they need to cash it. Don't hold on to it. No, you need to cash it, because you need to make sure it's not going to bounce. Because at closing, that check, you're going to give a credit back to the buyer if they close, if that first box is checked, which 100% of the time the first box is checked because they want that money back if they close. People always miss number 9. Definitely check one of these boxes. Was it before 1978 or not? That's an easy one everyone misses. Buyer brokerage, buyer's broker and seller's broker. Okay. Absolutely check number 1 on both of those. Even though if you don't know if they're representing them as a client, just check it. Because if you don't, what's going to happen is they're not going to check it, and then there's just going to have to be an amendment to fix it because it's supposed to be checked. And if it's wrong, then they need to correct it. So I always just check it for them and just assume that that's their client. If it's not right, then they need to make that correction, versus having to do an amendment later. Now, again, if you're both with KWIT, you would have to check number 4 as well, and you would have to put, this is where you put your name, not the brokerage name, you would put your name. If you're both with KWIT. So whomever's representing the buyer, whomever's representing the seller, that's the agent's name in that spot. And it's only if you're with the same brokerage. Material relationship is supposed to be between the buyer and seller, but honestly, if there's any material relationship, like I have an agent whose brother is the closing attorney. She discloses every time closing attorney is related to listing agent or whatever, or buyer's agent. So, I, representing my best friend that I've known forever, I put that down there as a material relationship. That buyer's agent is best friend of buyer. I mean, honestly, it's better to disclose than not. Because later then people get mad if they feel like they were deceived. Always put a time limit on your offer. And usually in this market, I would call the other agent and say, hey, when you're going to decide, and that's when my time limit usually is. In a normal market, I would only give them to the next day, like 5 p.m. Now you have to give them like the whole weekend and possibly through Monday. But always put a time limit. Otherwise, this offer is open. And you don't want to leave it open forever. And again, the rest of it's just explaining all the different sections, the earnest money. It's important to have the earnest money in on time. What the remedies are if there's anyone in default. The seller cannot sue the buyer for performance. They used to be able to, but they can't anymore. The buyer can. Buyers aren't going to do that. It's just a waste of their time. But the seller can't. The seller can only take earnest money if the buyer's in default. Page 7. This is where you would, and I literally, when I'm writing an offer, I look through here and say, okay, I don't have a cash exhibit, I'm not backup, the closing attorney's not holding the earnest money, there is a CAD, so I'll check that box and I'll make that A. I don't care if they gave it to me and it's labeled B, I'm gonna drop a box over it and make it A. I like mine in order, my exhibits in order. You can do what you want. But I go down through each one of these so I can make sure I don't forget, because it's easy to forget to add something. Community association disclosure, condo resale, again, we'll talk about that in another class, but if that's included, I'll check that box. If it's a conventional loan, I'll check that box. If it's FHA, lead-based paint, lease purchase, lease for lease, those two I've never seen anyone use. Legal description, there is a legal description exhibit. No one uses that. They usually use what the attorney gives them, which is the legal. You can check that box and still put whatever exhibit letter you're on now, and just drop a box on that legal description and say exhibit D, legal. And you would check it on here too. Even though it's checked on the first page, if you're attaching it, you have to include it on here, because this says that it's an exhibit now. No one uses loan assumption. Not in this market do you do a sale or lease, but that is in a normal market. Seller's property disclosure statements. Rare to have a survey, but if there is, you want to attach it to the contract, because that's anything that's with the property you would want to include. Temporary occupancy for seller, that's common in this market. You would want to include that. USDA, I've never seen anyone use. VA is rare. And then you would just write your special steps below. Any questions so far? Sorry, I'm trying not to go over time. No? Okay. Next page, please, 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 type your person's name. If you're representing the buyer, type your person's name. If you're representing a seller, type their name. Again, the way they sign these, it's really hard to read sometimes what their signature is. I don't include their phone number or their email address. I literally only include their name and their signature. I don't feel like the other agent needs to have that information. If the attorney needs it, I will get it for them. I don't provide it to the other agent or the seller. Always say you're submitting an offer, fill out your information, fill out the other agent's information too. It's in FMLS, fill it out. I see what happens if you don't is they'll only fill out half of it and the office is gonna ding you and make you fill out the rest. So you might as well just fill out all of it. And then honestly, agents look at it as, is this a sloppy contract or is this person on it? And if I see a contract that someone, and I know it takes time, went through and actually filled out my side of the information, I'm like, I'm gonna like working with this agent. They're not lazy, they're not sloppy, they're going to, they filled out my information. And again, it's all on FMLS. It's not something you're gonna have to ask them for. You can find all that information, except for the realtor membership. That you can't, and that's fine to leave blank on their side. On your side, you have to fill it in, because you know what your realtor membership is. Binding date, say you received an offer, you're on the seller side, and you're going to accept it. I usually call the agent that sent me the offer and say, are you okay if I bind this contract? Because to me, I want it bound. I want the days to start counting tomorrow. And usually 100% of the time, the agent's like, yeah, that's fine. But technically, you're supposed to send it back to them. They're supposed to bind it and send it back to you. I just try to cut out that whole sending it back to me and say, can I bind it? And they usually are like, fine. So I would put the date in, I would put my name in. I would send it over. Now they have a complete contract, and we're starting the clock ticking. But technically, you're supposed to send it back to the party and let them bind it. But again, I just call the other agent.
Meaning they've accepted the offer?
Yeah, so say I'm on the seller side.
Verbally?
Yeah, verbally. Yeah, verbally is fine.
Can I just go ahead and check
Yeah.
it, and then you send it over?
Yeah, and usually when they call me and say, hey, I submitted an offer and I have a feeling we're going to take it, I'll say, okay, are you cool if we're good with this? Can I go ahead and bind it? And I'll just get it back to you. And they're like, yeah, go for it. Because, and to me, I don't care if it's 10 o'clock at night. I want the day to start tomorrow. Versus if I send it back to them, they may not bind it until tomorrow, then I just lost a day if I'm on the seller side. So I like to have, you know, a little bit of control. And again, as long as you ask permission, they're fine. Agents are fine. Counteroffer. And counters can go multiple times. The important thing to know about a counteroffer is, say you submitted an offer, the seller countered, and your people want to counter again. The moment you counter, you can't go back and accept the seller's counter. It's off the table. I've had that happen where an agent didn't accept the seller's counter, they countered back, and then they changed their mind. It was too late, someone else jumped in and got the contract. So I just caution my people to say, nothing's done until it's done. I know they're playing with us right now because they're countering, but someone else can slide in there at any moment. And unless we're bound, you have no contract. And the moment you reject one of their counters, you can't go back and accept it. So that was a hard lesson for an agent. And the counters, you only have to change what you want to change. So on the contract, you don't have to fill out, I mean, if you're not changing the purchase price, you can just leave it blank. If you're changing possession, you would put the possession. So only the things you want to change. Everything else stays the same in the contract, unless you have it on this counter as changing. Like say, and always number your special stipulations. Because what I usually put is, if I, you know, special stipulations 3 and 5 to be removed from contract. If you don't, then those special stipulations are staying there. So anything you don't agree with, you have to make sure is on this counteroffer. And then again, you would put a time limit for the counteroffer as well. Does that make sense? Okay. Condo resale. So the condo resale, and I try to put these in the order that it was on the purchase and sale agreement. The condo resale is if there's, the time I use this exhibit is if there's common, say it's an HOA or multi-unit dwelling that has an HOA, but there's common areas. Like there's a dog park or there's a pool or something that's common in neighborhood. I would use this because it explains common expense assessments and common elements as is. Don't try to fill out number 1. If you're including a legal description, just put on the long line on number 1, just say see exhibit A or whatever it is, legal. That's all you have to put. Refer back to the legal. That's if you have a legal. If you don't, then you would have to put the debooking page. But the chances of finding all this information is slim to none. And also, they try to advise you not to be typing up a lot of information because it's easy for you to transpose numbers, which could totally mess up your deal. So it's best to just reference back to the legal description on this one. Conventional loan contingency. Okay, this is where you need to talk to the lender. I don't fill this out unless I talk to the lender. So you would check A, because I've never had anyone do a second mortgage. So again, you give it an exhibit letter, and exhibits are lettered in their own. There's no like A1, A2, A3. No, it's A, B, C, D. I've had people skip letters, which causes confusion because then everyone's wondering where's this exhibit. So it's better to keep in order. So give it a letter that matches your contract. Offer date is the first page of the contract. The top date is the offer date and the property address. First mortgage, this is where a lot of agents mess up. The loan amount. What they usually put here is what their client's putting down. They'll put 20%. And I'm like, seriously? They're getting a 20% loan? I doubt it. They're getting an 80% loan. So don't make that mistake. I've seen that happen to people that have been agents for a really long time. And I'll call them and say, are you sure they're getting a 20%? That just seems crazy. And they're like, oh God, did I mess that up again? And I'm like, mm-hmm. But, you know, that's the loan amount. And again, the lender can tell you. It's usually 30 years. You want to get the interest rate from them. And it's usually a fixed rate, and it's institutional. Under number 2, do not put anything in this box, approved mortgage lender. If you do, what's gonna happen is, because buyers are jumping all over the place with lenders. They shouldn't be, but they do. If you put a mortgage lender here and say they do not, and say they jump, you put XYZ mortgage, say they jump to ABC mortgage and they got a loan denial, you can't use that because you put XYZ mortgage company as the approved lender. If they use a totally different company and get a mortgage denial, you cannot use that denial letter. Whomever is in this box has to write the denial letter. And if they jump to someone else, they're not gonna be able to write a denial letter because they don't know anything, because they've left before they can even do anything for them. So it's best to leave it blank, and most times no one balks at that. They're like, fine, whatever. So leave that blank if you can. If not, you put multiple people in there that you think they might be going with. You don't have to just put one, you just put multiple. You need to try to leave it blank or put multiple. Financing contingency, again, ask the lender. I've seen, in this market, if the person is strong, like financially, I've seen people putting 0 here, no problem. But that's a question for the lender. Are you okay with me putting 0 here? Way back, it used to be 21 days and 21 days. 21 for financing and 21 for appraisal. That isn't in today's market. It's usually 0 and 0. People are putting 0 for appraisal contingency now too, which means that if it doesn't appraise, they're bringing that money to closing. Again, talk to then this is up to your client as well. I mean, if they're okay with 0 and they have the funds to be able to make up an appraisal gap, and it's not really even a gap, because if you put 0 here, you're paying any difference between the appraisal and the purchase price. I would ask the lender if that's, if your clients are like, no, I don't want to do that, then see what, can we do 7 days? Can we do 10 days? I mean, 21 days is not going to happen. That's gone. So see what the lowest amount that they feel like they can make happen in that pot. Any questions so far? Sorry, am I going too fast? We good? Okay. All cash sale exhibit. I'm seeing a lot of these now. I was born in the wrong family, I've determined, because I couldn't do that. But you give it, again, you don't have multiple financing exhibits. It's either you have a conventional loan, a cash exhibit, a VA, or FHA. You don't obviously put all these in there. You just pick whatever one works for your situation. Again, different, you give it an exhibit letter. If you, there's a buyer and a seller side story on this one. So, number one, if you are on the buyer side, you're gonna want the A boxes checked, because that gives you an option to get a mortgage. And you also have an option to do the 8-day unilateral extension. If I'm on a seller side and you're telling me you're paying cash, I don't want to hear that you're going to try to go get a mortgage, because that's not what you told me. If you're cash, you're going to be attractive. I'm going to want you to check B. And if you check B, you do not have a right to do an 8-day unilateral extension if your lender or someone needs more time. That right is gone. So, again, there's sort of devil's advocate. If you're on the buyer side, you're going to, have that option. Unless they're purely cash, like the multi-millionaire, there's no way they're getting a loan, then fine. You're going to be more attractive as B. But just know that you can't unilaterally extend for that. Verification of funds, if I'm on a seller side, you better be giving me your verification of funds when you submit your offer. I don't want to see it 3 days later, because you may not be able to afford this house. I want to see your funds now. So if you're submitting an offer, usually I see people put 0 days because they're submitting it with their offer. And then appraisal contingency. In this market, I'm seeing shall not be subject to an appraisal contingency. If we go back to a normal market one day and you do shall on the next page, you need to make sure whatever number you put in there about how many days to get the appraisal back, that you can get it back in time. Because don't put like 3 days, because I don't know what appraiser you're going to get that's going to be there and back and get you the information within, and negotiate within 3 days. You need to be realistic. But again, in today's market, I'm seeing shall not, and they're not getting their appraisal. Lead-based paint. This is the one that will cost you a lot of money if the office gets audited, and it is a federal law. anything pre-1978. This also includes, say you have a house and they brought in an antique fireplace mantle, antique beadboard, antique light fixtures. If they have all that in there, you better do a lead-based paint, because they just brought lead into that house. The house may not have had lead in it, but it does now, because you just brought it in. There are some brokerages that even if the house is not pre-1978, they do require their agents, they must have gotten dinged or something, they require their agents to do this. Sellers usually mess up on A and B. They usually check the initial the wrong box. So say they initial the first box and it says, you know, there's a known lead-based paint, whatever, and they don't explain. Usually what I do when I get this, I'll look at it, see if it's right. If it's not right, I'll call the agent and say, did your seller check the wrong box? And they're usually like, oh, yes, they did. So then they'll fix it. But if they didn't check the wrong box, they need to explain. There's a reason that says explain below. They need to explain. So they either need to correct it or they need to explain before your people sign it, before you go binding. Same with the second one. I've had sellers just initial the first box and they didn't really need to because they don't have any reports or records, but if they do, they need to share them and they need to explain. Most of the time, it's the second box on both of these that are initialed by the seller. The C, if you know, they give you records or whatever, then yes, your buyer should initial that they received any of the information listed above. Again, that's rare. D, they absolutely should be initialing this because this is the brochure you're giving them. Your protect your family from lead. So you need to have that initialed. E, I don't even know why there's a first one there because this 10-day opportunity has to be before you go under contract. No one's going to do a lead assessment before they go under contract. So don't have them initial that first box. They need to initial the second box where they waive it. They are allowed to do a lead inspection during their due diligence period. That is perfectly fine. But you can't check the first one because they didn't do it before they went under contract. F, this is where the listing agent initials, and then again, sellers need to sign first. You can sign on the same day, but the seller has to sign first. And then you have your buyer's initial and sign, and then you sign. Again, people need to take this form seriously because no one wants to pay tens of thousands of dollars in a fine. And if you're doing a listing, please have that already done if you need to. Just get it done because you're going to have to provide it anyways. Seller's disclosure, it's awesome when you get one of these because it gives you a lot of information about the property. The other seller's disclosure, which is a newer form that they came out with, is like 2 pages long, and you get literally the only thing that's beneficial is it gives you the checklist of what's remaining, but other than that, it's to me not a great form because it doesn't give you a lot of details. So that this one, you know, I would just, again, review this before you give it to your client, and, you know, just see if there's anything that jumps out on you. Talks about when it was constructed, how long has it been vacant. Historic district, that's important. If you have a client that's buying in Emmett Park and they want to build a second story on a house, Emmett Park is very strict. If the street only has 1-story houses, you are not allowed to build a second story on that house. You have to build back. Build back is more expensive. Your client may not be interested in that. So they've got to understand if there's a historic district, they need to understand what the historic restrictions are. HOA, again, we talked about HOA. You know, if there's HOA restrictions, that might impact them as well. It talks about additions, alterations, building codes. If they talk about the fact that they did stuff without permits, and also share this with your inspector before they go and visit the house. I send them a copy of this, and I take a copy with me to the inspection and make sure, you know, especially if they say, oh, well, we finished the basement and added some supports. Inspector may want to take some better look at that. Just had a situation recently that property was sold in December. Come to find out, the sellers did not finish their permits and had a stop work order. Inspector knocked on the buyer's door and said, you need to finish this permit out. And they're like, we didn't know anything about this. They're like, too bad, you own this property now, you have to finish this permit out. So it caused a whole big problem with them. So, I mean, City of Atlanta's easier because they have all their stuff online that you can go and look and figure out what permits are out there. But some of the other neighborhoods, it's not. But if you walk into a property and you know they gutted it and went down to the studs, there better be a permit somewhere. And I would be asking for it and making sure that it's been closed out. Because your buyer could inherit that and the city could be knocking on their door. And honestly, without a certificate of occupancy, they can make them leave. Because it's not safe. They didn't inspect it. So, HVAC, they took out the age of the HVAC, which people got mad about, but they say when was the last service. Age of the water heaters. Water heater's not that huge of an expense, but roof is. Next page, roof. I mean, if you see that the roof's like 20 years old, I would start telling my clients, if it's not leaking, they're probably not going to do anything about this. You need to plan for replacing this roof. You know, there's just certain things that they just need to, you know, start putting money aside for. And a roof will be a big one. Talking about flooding and dampness. Termites again, if you see that they have a termite bond, you would want to ask that, you know, that it transfers at no cost to your buyer, because that would be a good thing for them to have. There is a website out there, I don't have it up, but that you can see whether a house has been labeled as a meth house. And meth houses are very toxic. They have to have specialized people come in and take care of the contamination. I was showing a house once and a neighbor ran over and said, I wouldn't go in that house. He said that was a meth lab. I literally took one step in the door, turned back around and said, we're not walking in this house. Because it's toxic. I mean, there's particles that can be in the air, it's highly flammable. I was like, okay, we're not seeing this house, sorry. But there's a website that you can look for to see whether or not it is a meth house. But yeah, the neighbor, I don't think a house ever sold because the neighbor was always running over and telling everyone. Any litigations, that would be good to know. When you have them check on their insurance, the insurance company will tell you whether there's been claims. So I've definitely had where someone said there's no insurance claims. Well, when they went to get insurance, they're like, yeah, they had a claim for the roof. They just replaced the roof or whatever. They need to go back to the seller and say, look, what happened? We need an explanation about this. Plus, insurance claims follow the house. It doesn't follow the person. So that can impact how much they're going to pay for insurance as well. How many claims this person had on a house. You know, there's any hidden defects. Appliances, page 6. So if you do not get a seller's disclosure, you need to take this page, you need to write a special steps and say the following items to remain at no cost to buyer. Go through here. Was there a washer and dryer there? Washer, dryer, dishwasher, garage door opener, garbage disposal. That's why it's important to have this, because I have definitely shown a house and I'll be like, I don't know if there's a disposal there, and obviously they're not going to show you a picture of the disposal. So it's important to have this so you know what actually is within the house. I've definitely gone there and been like, is there a microwave? I don't even remember that either. And I've definitely shown a house that there was no dishwasher. So it helps you also see things that you may not have, you know, you may have just, you know, because if it's cute and whatever and you're blinded by the cuteness, you may not pay attention to the details. But it's very important to go through here and list out, I mean, even as silly as switchblade covers, list it. Ceiling fans, chandeliers, closet systems. Go through the whole list. Even if they check these, I take this with me and I'm like, wait a minute. There's a vent hood. That's not checked. So I would write a special stip. The following item to remain and no cost. Because they didn't check it on here. And it's okay for them to sign this. The special stip is going to override what's in here. So even though they signed that it's not there, they also wrote a special stip that the seller signed saying that it's going to stay.
So you take this like to the final walkthrough? Or?
I take it before I write an offer.
Okay.
This is when I write an offer. I will take this with me. And if I don't have one of these, a special seller's property disclosure statement, I take this page and I will go and check the item. So when I get back to write that contract, I know what I have to include in the contract. I mean, thermostats. Some of these people have some really nice thermostats, they could be taking that Nest thermostat. Well, what is your client gonna do? They're not gonna have a thermostat. So, I mean, things as silly as a mailbox. I mean, definitely just go through everything. Because you don't want your client moving in and all of a sudden there's no thermostat. They took all the light bulbs, all the switchblade covers. They're not gonna be happy because they're gonna feel like you did not represent them well and make sure that their interest was covered. An important statement is, and Case mentioned this a moment ago, this is as they existed on a property as of the offer date. If they have window blinds in here, but as of offer date, there was no window blinds, you're not getting window blinds because there wasn't any there to begin with. It could have just been their mistake. I had this happen with a builder where they checked window blinds, and even, I don't know why they used this form, but they did. And the buyer was really mad because there was a lot of windows in this house and they thought they were getting blinds. They weren't getting blinds because it wasn't there as of offer date. Also, you have a new construction and the builder says, I'm gonna put up a gate. You better be making sure that gate's gonna happen and have some sort of stipulation in there. I've had that happen where the reason the buyer wanted this development is because they were gonna have a gate. Well, the builder changed their mind. There was no gate. And they weren't gonna get it. And they were very upset because it was security reasons they wanted to have that gate. So if it's not in the contract, you're not getting it. So you just need to make sure if it's something that's really important to your client, it makes it into the contract. Community association disclosure. It is really important for your sellers, if you're representing sellers, to fill this out accurately. Because if there's something that's on here that they either omitted or they downplayed the number, if it's different at closing, they're gonna pay the difference. So if they forget to put an initiation fee or they put 0 and initiation fee is $2,000, guess who's paying for that at closing? Your seller. And then guess who the seller's gonna be looking at to help pay for that? You. Because you didn't review the form and say, are you sure? Like when I get a contract from you, I'll look at it and I'll say, especially if you're on the seller side, I'm like, are you sure there's no initiation fee? You better ask your seller because the time to fix it is now. And honestly, the buyer doesn't have to agree to fix it, especially if it's some ridiculous amount of money. Because they may have made a different offer if they knew that the initiation fee was $2,000. They may have negotiated something different. So I can see from the buyer side why it would be a penalty to the seller. So just make sure, and do not call the HOA for your buyers. They have to call themselves. If they have questions, you are not to be the one to do it because you could get someone that doesn't know anything. They gave you information, you give false information to your buyer, they're gonna blame you. Same with schools. If a school is very important to them, they need to call the school district to make sure this house is in that school district. Don't rely on what's online. Agents sometimes put things wrong, but don't rely on that. They need to call themselves. It is very important for you not to get in the middle of that.
You said school and what else?
School and HOA.
Okay.
They should call the HOA. And so it's important to know, are there assessments? Because like we were talking about, if there's assessments that are due after closing, that's going to be the buyer's responsibility. Anything before closing, it's the seller's. Again, on the second page, the transfer initiation fee. I definitely have caught closing attorneys putting these on the wrong side. When you bring me a buyer and I help review your settlement statement, I'll look and I'll go back to the CAD and I'll say, wait a minute, they said 0. Why are you charging me $500 for initiation fee? No, that's going to be on the sellers, and I make them move it over to the sellers. But you just got to pay attention to that level of detail, even on the settlement statement. And it talks about, what does the assessments pay for? Make sure they answer this. Is there any litigation? Is there any violations? Don't feel like just because they gave this to you and it's not complete that you can't kick this back to them and say, sellers to complete the community association disclosure and return to buyer within 24 hours. Don't feel like you have to sign something if it's not complete, because then you're just setting up your buyer for accepting something that he or she shouldn't have. The next form is the F510. That's if the closing attorney is holding the earnest money. And again, it's just list the closing attorney, their information. Number 7, alternate. It used to be that you had to put a broker's name in here. You don't have to anymore because it says if there's no alternate named that it's going to be the buyer's broker, which is normally the one that holds the earnest money. So you don't have to worry about filling in number 7. But this basically is the buyer and seller agreeing, yes, the closing attorney is going to hold our money. F511, this is where the attorney signs. So the other one was the buyer and seller sign. This one, F511, and they go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. This is the attorney agreeing. And on this, honestly, I just put the buyer's name, their email and their phone number, seller's name, and if I know any of their information, I'll fill it in. If I don't, I just leave it blank. I fill out the buyer's licensee's number, the seller's license, the broker's information, and their broker, and I don't put their address, but I put their phone number and their email. I just put the basic information so that if they have to call someone, they can get it. And this is the closing attorney. They'll sign this and say, yes, I agree. I will hold the earnest money. We doing okay on time?
We're a little over.
Okay, I'm gonna hurry. I only have like 4 more pages. Reminder, thank you guys for hanging in there. Reminder of important dates. If, when we do your contracts, we will fill this out. This basically says what you know, what's the bonding agreement date, when's the earnest money due, so your key dates. So again, we will fill this out for you and include it in the email to your clients so that they know what the important dates are. Your commission agreement, we fill this out for you as well. If you're on the buyer side, we'll just we'll go on to Fmls and we'll see what is your commission supposed to be, and we'll fill out 1B. We will not fill out 1A because we don't know what the other agent's total commission that they're getting from the seller. And we have you sign it and then we send it to the other agent and they fill it out and your commission agreement's done. Your under contract checklist, and then you guys can be done. We update so you definitely need, I don't know what systems you use, but make sure all your documents, like say you use .lib, make sure everything's in there. Your contracts, your buyer brokerage, everything. The reminder of important dates, like I said, the transaction coordinator will do that. Submit the contract to the brokerage, we do that too. We will go in command, we will submit all your stuff. Our goal is to put as clean a contract as we can in there. Our goal is to get you paid to close and get you to closing. We submit your contract to the brokerage. We send a contract, the entire contract and the important dates to the client, the lender if you're representing the buyer, the closing attorney, and the other agent. Remember that exhibits are always letters and amendments are always numbers. So don't letter both of them. And there's a reason why, so you don't get confused. And the lender should get copies of all amendments. We send every single amendment to the lender. If you hold back an amendment from a lender, it can be considered mortgage fraud if you're trying to hide it. Like a lot of people do amendment to address concerns and it has a million things on it and they're like, I don't want the lender. I'm like, I don't care, the lender's getting it. If whatever they do with it, once I send it over to them, I don't know what they do with it and it doesn't matter. I did my job protecting you. We got everything over to them. But yeah, you're not supposed to hide amendments from lenders. Manage your expectation with your clients. Even though inside you're like freaking out, don't freak out. You gotta be calm. You gotta stay calm. You freak out after you hang up. You're the buffer between your client. If you stay calm, it'll help the situation. If you start bashing the other agent, that's not gonna help. Even though you want to, just keep that aside. Don't talk to your client about the other agent, because then they start getting all worked up and then they start hating the other agent, then they start hating the seller, and that's when things start going south. Keep ahead of your deadlines and contingencies. Like I said, when we do as your transaction coordinator, we will let you know. Hey, how's the due diligence going? It's ending. Are you good? If not, you may want to ask for more time. Always collect your earnest money on time. If not, then you need to have you need to give notice that you don't have it immediately to the other agent. Always give your clients clear choices. Try to give them 3 closing attorney, lenders, home inspectors, and check in with the lender. Even if you're representing the seller, you're allowed to contact the lender to see how things are going.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, that was a whirlwind at the end.
You only went 10 minutes over.
Oh, that's it. I can't see. It's like this big up there. I'm like, I don't even know what time it is. It's like, it could be 5 o'clock for all I know.
Where can we get like all that paperwork? I know a lot of it's on guard, but is all of it on guard?
You gave them a copy of this, right?
Yeah, so couple things, make sure you're using the ellerseliteagents.com. If you have not signed a coaching contract, you cannot get access to it. We've just finished the new coaching contract, which I think you all will really like. It's very friendly, removes a lot of things from the old one. So we will get that sent out to you, but this is actually in the buyer resources section, but you did get an email that was sent out with this as well. There's also checklists in there in the back end for you, which we're going to be editing over time because there's some stuff we're going to add in. But we're going to have Word docs and things that we're sharing with Cherie.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Was this helpful?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
You learned maybe one thing you didn't know.